So welcome everybody. Really good to see everyone here, making time out of your day to join us. A little bit of disclaimer before we get started. I am a little under the weather, so please bear with me if I go a little bit slowly or if I sneeze and stuff like that. Luckily, I cannot pass it on to you through the video. So today we're going to talk about collaboration. We've been talking about the different pillars that emerged out of a consultation project that we did with indigenous communities in Canada and also in Latin America. And this is the last pillar of that framework, which is collaboration. As usual, we're going to start with a story. And so you have a beautiful photo here of my story is about. And so this story actually goes back to the very beginning of my time at community engaged learning at the university. It was almost 5 years ago. Had finished my master's in philosophy with a focus on political philosophy. I had, after that, gotten an internship with Global Affairs Canada to work on a project in an island in Chile to help create an intercultural school with a religious community and a university in Canada. So I had all these ideas about, politics in the world and what needs to happen. So right after that, I came and joined CL here with the team. And one of the programs that I was supposed to run was a collaboration with a Quechua collective of midwives in the Amazon region of Ecuador. And that was my first year, and I sort of was looking for ways to support the community in my work. And I luckily I had connected with a local collaborator in the community, and he was able to give me a lot of information and connect me with a lot of people and tell me a lot about the challenges that the community was facing. So um, one of the big challenges that the community was facing and still facing at a time is due to climate change. So I was like, like climate change. I studied climate change and justice in my thesis, and I should focus on something like this. It's important for the community. And then I thought, well, how am I going to go about doing something? So talking to my collaborator, Pato, he said, oh, I have this friend. He's also from the community, but he's a scientist and works with the German International Cooperation in the Amazon in Ecuador. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. I mean, I should talk to him and like see what they're doing. So we chatted, we met a couple times. When I went down to Ecuador, we met with other professors from universities. We had this big meeting, and he showed me some plans they had been working on with the community to increase the resilience to climate change. And he said, one of the things that we need to do and we haven't been able to do is to bring new technology, because the way that the collective is starting their plants, their seedlings, is not working. So we need to bring this new technology to help them. So he told me about this project to build a stainless steel custom-made raised bed, which is what you're seeing in the image right now. So that raised bed cost about 1,500 US at a time. And I was like, okay, like through our programs, we can fund that because we make a collaboration to the community. So that collaboration this year will be to fund the raised bed for the community. So we went ahead with our program. We bought the raised bed, we built it. There was heavy machinery who like came into the garden and set it in place. And I thought, this is great. Like I am supporting the community, and now they'll be able to grow their plants, and it'll be great for them. Every year that I come back, and this is I've gone back now 4 times at least. Um, I walk through the gardens with this bed is placed, and last year I was walking by the garden and I was like, oh, where is the raised bed that we financed that first year? And I couldn't find it. And I kept looking around and thought, like, there's no way that they moved it because you need, um, I don't know, like at least a forklift to move this thing. And there's no way they did it. Where did it go? And then eventually I realized that the raised bed was exactly where I left it. It was just now covered in a mess of branches and overgrown plants. Um, and that was the year that I had the realization that, you know, the community has never really used this bed. They probably used it once just to not hurt my feelings. But it's just been sitting there for 4 years. And to me, this was one of those aha moments of, wait a minute, like this was a moment where I didn't work with the community in the way that they should have. And I went and talked to people who have a different way of thinking, who work outside of the community and made a choice of what the contribution should be to help them. And this is what happened. We just spend a bunch of money in something that doesn't help them because it's not something that they will use. Now, why won't they use it? Because they have their own knowledges, their own traditions, and their own ways of adapting to challenges. And those ways work. They work really well. They work for hundreds of years. So there's no reason for us to do something different. Thinking back, those 1500 US, I should have just given them to the community and said, here, we heard that you're having problems, growing your seeds. Here's some money for you to invest in whatever it is that you need, or in whatever projects or goals your community has. So that was, I think, the biggest lesson I've learned working with communities. And this is sort of like a segue into our chat about collaboration and how to collaborate in a good way with Indigenous communities in ways that is effective for them. So um, what we're going to share today is basically what we learned about collaborating with Indigenous communities in an Indigenous-led way. Um, it's going to be a little bit different than our other sessions in the sense that we're just going to share practices, like very concrete. These are things that we ourselves realize that we should be doing, and we're inviting folks to do the same. And they're divided in 5 categories. So the first one is the use of critical, anti-oppressive, and anti-colonial lenses to our work. The second is the importance of cultivating diverse relationships in the community. So not just working with one group of people, designing our work for community benefit explicitly, supporting good communication, and working in ways that work for the community. So let's start with the first category, critical, anti-oppressive, and anti-colonial lenses. The first practice there is to resist the savior complex, which is in a very big way what I didn't do that first year. Um, the savior complex is something that is instilled in us through academia and professional settings in the West, and is a charitable approach, so a top-down approach that is self-serving in the end, and reinforces the illusion that communities can take care of themselves. So in the case of the raised bed, like I said, the community already had the knowledge, the technology, and the skills to do this. There was no reason for us to bring in something from outside to help them in that sense. Um, Avoid victim blaming. So this has to do with the fact that all of the challenges that Indigenous communities face today are the product of colonization and that project. So when we approach our work, we have to be careful to reframe the way we think to address the root causes of those challenges, but also to challenge our approaches, methods, and ways of thinking to make sure that we're not, sort of like trying to fight fire with fire. If like in the example of the raised bed, I thought the community has a challenge. I should like talk to the scientists and the engineers and like all these Western NGOs to see what's the best solution. And in a way, I'm just going back to the same way of thinking and methods and strategies that went along with colonization in the first place. Um, Communities have their own way of doing things. And here we have a lovely quote from one of the people we interviewed, Charlene Lafreniere from a Northern Indigenous community member. They said, people who let the work be changed and influenced by the communities we're partnering with, who are flexible, are working in good ways. The next practice is to embrace strength-based approaches. So, sometimes when we come to communities, we might be imagining challenges that are not in there, or imposing or visions of the good life that come from our settler colonial imagination onto communities. So we have to remember that Indigenous peoples already hold the values, knowledges, and relationships to carry out the work to support their own visions of a good life. Um, in the same category, sharing and divesting or powering wealth. So here it's about the importance of advocating for institutional recognition, support and funding that supports relationship building, Indigenous-led collaboration and reparations. And at the same time, challenging university policies that limit the power and control of communities over their projects. Now we're in a different category. So cultivate diverse relationships. Again, the importance of diversifying who it is that we work with in the community. And this has to do a lot with, from planning, designing your project to evaluations and assessment. Who are you talking to? So work with the whole community. Oftentimes we say we work with X community, but really we mean we work with one or two people in that community. So how can we actually include more people in our projects? And that's the importance of thinking about things like gender, life stages, roles, positionality, who is informing our work. Also the importance of working with people who are close to the situation. So working with local Indigenous organizations and community members who still live in the community, and remembering the importance of involving people who might not be considered as decision makers or people who hold power. In the work that I do, that often has been the youth. So I go to a community, I talk to the adults, I talk to the people who hold political posts, who are established in a practice, but oftentimes the youth sort of like fall through the cracks when it comes to planning or assessing our work. So that's just one example of bringing people closer who are not always considered the decision makers. So one of the ways, or one of the things that we have to pay attention to when we want to include and connect with the community at large is having someone or some people who can help us connect to other folks in the community. So here I'm going to ask Annie to tell us a little bit about Agnes, who we've mentioned before in our Lunch and Learns, to put this into context.
Sure, thanks, Hera. So I guess just generally a reflection that a few of the points that Hera has made, right? That when we want to work with people who are close to the situation, I think the only way we can find out who those people are is to talk to the people who live in the community. I think there's a tendency for us to work with our peers. So other people in paid positions, maybe who are university educated, maybe who hold like these like formal roles. Sometimes those folks are not in the community, or they're not connected to the community. And we heard that from several folks that we consulted with, that they've been on part of projects where the coordinator, the local project coordinator, wasn't local, at least not in their eyes. So Agnes is a woman and a well-respected community leader in Scannon First Nation. The Agnes worked at the school and was a really wonderful part of our Children Rising mentorship program. And it was a pre-existing relationship before I went in. But when we asked Agnes, like, what should people do to work in good ways? She said, find an Agnes, as you can see from this quote. But the idea being that you need someone who understands the dynamics of the community, who can tell you when you're making the wrong step, connect you to the right people. So Agnes was really our hands-on local program coordinator. She's the person who knew what to do and how to do it and who to get involved, right? So if I wanted to organize a sharing circle for the university mentors and the community youth, Agnes would know which elders to get in touch with, which community members might want to participate, what time would be the best time for everybody, what protocols we should be following, if I should have a gift ready, how to organize the honoraria payments. All of these small details that I could have just organized a sharing circle, but would it have been following the community protocols? Would the right people have been there? Would it have been done in a good way, right? That's just one small example, but Agnes helped with everything like that. Everything from going ice fishing to cooking the dinner, to organizing teachings, communicating, coming in on the trips with the youth to Winnipeg. So all aspects. And I think importantly, Agnes knew the families of the youth, had relationships with youth, worked at the school, was the person people would call up if they needed someone to talk to, youth or families, was very involved as a community member, and was a sort of parent for a lot of people, a lot of youth in the community. I think the other thing to recognize here is also that Agnes did not do this work for free for us. So we had a partnership with Career Track, and so Career Track was paying for Agnes to be a local coordinator. And then when that partnership ended, we paid for Agnes to be our local coordinator. So recognizing that this is work, and that we should consider what we're getting paid to do this coordination work and what local partners should be getting paid as well.
Thanks, Annie. So find yourself an Agnes. Don't find yourself a Pato. So Pato was the local coordinator that I had that first year that wasn't part of the community. He had relationships with the community, but wasn't really living there and wasn't that close to the situation. Find yourself an Agnes. All right, so the next category is designing for community benefit. Here, the main thing to remember is like designing the project, the program, whatever you're doing is the first thing that you do and should happen with the community in a way that makes it explicit how they're going to benefit. So, in the case of the raised bed, designing a program that says we're going to support with climate change resilience. Had I done that with the community, they might have said, okay, just give us the money. Like, don't buy us that piece of metal. So when we approach them, those questions, what are your needs, community? And do we have the means to meet those needs? Those should be the questions rather than, here's my agenda, how can you help me meet my outcomes? So also important here is to design for community ownership of project and outcomes. So here, people who are in academia and do research are a little bit more familiar with, OCAP and things about like academic ownership of things. But in community engaged learning, the work that we do, we can also do this work. And here are some examples. So if we create a curriculum or a program designed with the community, we can give those rights to the community. And another thing that has been mentioned by my partners, especially in Chile, is involving the community in interviewing the students who will go and have a placement with them. If you think about it, wouldn't you want to know who you're bringing into your home? Like, wouldn't you want to know who you're introducing to your families, who's going to be around your children, your ceremonies? So this is a really like commonsensical thing, um, a really good practice to do also. Anticipating and reducing the harms and burdens of working with university. This is a point that we've touched on quite a few times in the past. So, and this goes from challenging anti-indigenous racism and white supremacy in our work, um, to creating workarounds for processes or procedures that are burdensome for communities, and documenting our experiences of how we find or create those workarounds so that eventually they can be advocated for and institutionalized. So creating that evidence base for change, basically. So the following category has to do with communication, a really key area of our work. So how to support good communication with communities we work with. The first thing is to be open and consistent in our communication. So don't instrumentalize communication. The importance of staying in touch with people beyond the time that we're working together on a project, and also the importance of being honest and upfront about any challenges. So not holding our cards close to ourselves and trying to be strategic, because that's not collaboration. That's something else. So also the importance of using methods that work for the community. So in universities, in Western institutions, we're very used to email. That's like the only thing almost that we do, or Teams or something like that. But communities don't always work like that. So some people do like emails, but some people prefer to chat in person, talk on the phone, use social media. I use Facebook Messenger and WhatsApp, I would say exclusively, for my work with communities, except when I'm sending some sort of official document that will happen over email. But those technologies are there and more accessible to people than emails and telephones sometimes. Also, the importance of using language that is accessible and appropriate for the community. So obviously, we shouldn't be using jargon that is not accessible for people, but we should also pay attention to how people talk, what words they use, how they communicate, so we can adapt our communication. Working with indigenous communities, it's also, in my case, the Quechua community I work with, their first language is Quechua. They're people who don't speak Spanish. So the importance of bringing a translator with me, or finding someone in the community who can do that work and hiring them in that role, not just asking them, hey, can you translate this? It's very tiring work. I do it quite a bit. Um, so the next category, working in ways that work for the community. So make decisions with the community. We would think that this is very commonsensical, but when we actually break down all the stages of a project, um, oftentimes in those initial stages, the community might not be involved. Um, so the importance of that, but also the sharing power in program planning, again, from the beginning, coordinating and budgeting for our projects, and finding ways in which the community can have actual, tangible decision-making power over the work that we do. Um, Also, when working with communities that have many different members or a collective, it is important to understand that decision-making processes can take a long time. So communities don't always work in a hierarchical way, like in a university where my supervisors will make a decision, and that's what I have to do. In collectives and communities, it often involves agreement between all the members, and that takes a long time. So making time and space for those processes to happen Doing the work that needs to be done. Um, you know, clarifying the roles and the supports that a partnership needs to make the work happen. Also, be prepared to do unexpected work. So when we're having those conversations, and the importance of not offloading work on the community without properly resourcing or remunerating them. One quick example, again from this community, Quichua Collective in Ecuador, and it took me a couple of years to realize, is that when I or we call for a meeting, this means that the mamas, the midwives, have to travel very, 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 very long distances and have to pay for the buses, which are expensive. Sometimes walk in the rain, sometimes, you know, rearrange their appointments, etc., to make it to that 1 hour meeting, maybe just to touch base. In universities, we love meetings because we can like, see each other and we're all in the same space and it's easier. But when working with communities, there are considerations that come into place. So what I started doing was now every time that not every time, but um, there would be a fund for transportation and things that the community can access for when we have a meeting so that they don't have to pay for the buses or they can rearrange their commitments. Um, so that's one of the examples of that invisible cost of the work that we do together. If there is also significant work expected from the community, we should be hiring people to do that work instead of expecting them to do it for free or on their own time. And something that came up a lot of times for people who work with universities, the importance of paying people on time. So we have this, 2-week policy with communities. Oh, we'll process your payment. It will take about 2 weeks for it to get to you. That shouldn't be the case. It should be ideally the same day that we are doing the work or the following day at the very best. Um, Properly resourcing people and paying them on time again. So we should clarify how we can best support a partnership in a project and then do whatever the community needs for that to happen. Did I just talk about that? No. I think maybe do not offload work on the community without providing proper resources and remuneration. Okay, this is a different slide. Um, Dedicated. Sorry, I got a little bit confused here, so I'm just gonna move to the next one, which is our reflection for today. So those are the practices in a nutshell. I'll invite Annie and Nikki in a couple minutes here to see if they have anything that they would like to add. And then, as usual, we'll move into our critical reflection part of the session, where we'll ask you to get together with other folks in the call and then chat about these questions. We'll come back and we'll debrief.